Your flag's fallen down.
Hello. Yes.
For the north, east, south, and west, this is Steve England reporting in the public convenience.
Well, good afternoon.
Hi there.
After all these great stories, I have to put you up with my English. I'm sorry
for fantastic.
That. That's great, isn't it?
I just have to reiterate, we feel from our perspective that we were the second generation of pirate people. And our gods were the first generation, the people like Ron O'Quinn, Johnny Walker, and all the London people, Radioday, and so forth. And, but we were too young. I was only 15 when Radio England was on the air. I was still at school. And so it had always been my... one of the things I really wanted to do was work for Ron O'Quinn. And the last 2 days, I managed to work for Ron O'Quinn. Now, it wasn't on the radio. He was metal detecting, and I was in charge of the spade. So he would point with his foot where I had to jump on the spade, throw the earth on one side, and then we would usually pick out a bit of scrap metal. No, we actually got some good stuff, but I finally got to work for Ron O'Quinn, who's my hero.
Yes, and this morning I only learned Steve England isn't your real name at all.
Isn't it? Oh, no, I noticed.
Yeah, Steve Prentice, you chose your name from Radio England.
That's right. Yes, I mean I was such a fan of Radio England in its short life, and do you know people? Even Ron will say it wasn't a success. It was a success in terms of the programming. It came along when there were two extremely well-established stations. It didn't have enough finance because of the mast going down and so forth. So they really got a bit of a difficult job to do, and I think they did a fantastic job and got a big audience in a very short space of time. 2.5 million, I think, in 3 months, 4 months. That's a big audience. But
was this the station that made you think, I want to be a disc jockey?
Absolutely. I mean, I would have killed for Ron to be hitting me on the head with a newspaper. He hasn't done it yet.
Well, handling the spade, it's about second in place, isn't it?
Yeah. How I got involved is with Pirate Radio. So I got to know the photographer Martin Stevens, and I'm sure that you've all seen his photographs. They are the best ones from the 1960s. And I got to know him, and he said, would you like to come with me? I'm going to take some photographs of Caroline that's just started up. And I went out twice with him, and went out to the tender and got on board for a few seconds and then off again. The second time we went to the Mrs. Pleiter's, the place in Scheveningen, where their headquarters were. And I'm just tailing behind Martin, and And we get up into the top room, which is where they kind of had their headquarters, in this bed and breakfast in Scheveningen. And they're all saying some very strange things to each other, and we're trying to figure out what happened. And we look on the horizon, and there are 2 lights, not 3 lights there. And between Martin and ourselves, we sussed out that the ship wasn't there anymore. And it had been towed into Amsterdam Harbour. And so Martin and I, together with, I think, a nurse that he was dating at the time, we went in his Mini up to Amsterdam. We arrived on New Year's Eve, and we arrived just at the time. I think either Ronan he arrived about the same time anyway at the ship in Amsterdam Harbour. Well, all the crew had buggered off to enjoy themselves in Amsterdam. And they were having a party, and they'd left the ship, a real total wreck, none of the dishes done, everything a mess. And I very quickly set to work and, cleaned as much as I could and polished anything to ingratiate myself with Ronan and the rest and so forth. And then the ship, if I get my history right, went out to, I think that might have been, New Year's Day. They figured out that New Year's Day there would be no law that they could they wouldn't be able to raise any lawyers and get any judges to stop the ship going out. So they made a break for the sea through the Mouden Canal.
And that was clever thinking indeed.
Yes, yeah, it was very clever. Although, the opposition got wind of it and tried to stop it. And eventually, the story, it got back off Scheveningen again. And I ran up to Ronan and I said, Ronan, I was the guy that cleaned all the dishes and made the place nice. And I really, I don't want any money, but can I stay on board? Can I stay on board? And, and he, God bless him, he said, yeah, okay, you can stay on board. So I immediately went and hid in the farthest reaches of the ship, where I thought nobody would find me. Waited till I could hear that the tender had gone, and then I emerged, and they said, what are you doing here? It was everybody off the ship that's not broadcasting. And I said, well, Ronan said I could stay. And they said, oh, all right, then. Well, there's not another tender for a week, so sure enough. And I stayed, and I did absolutely everything I possibly could to stay on that ship. I think the terms they used to use in those days, it's a free trip, i.e. you weren't paid. And that lasted for about 9 months. I did get a little bit of pay, but not very much. And I was lucky enough I just had a bit of luck. I got up in the middle of the night, about 3 o'clock or something, from the cabin that I was sharing with, I think, Crispy and St. John. And I got up just the time that they were doing the program schedule, and they were saying, who's going to go on between 3 and 6 tomorrow? And everybody said, forget it, man, I'm not going on. And I said, I'll do it. And I think it was Andy Archer said, were you a DJ? Or, I guess I was a DJ. I'm going to do discotheques, and I'd love to do it. He said, oh, right, well, nobody else wants to do it, so you can do it. And that's my first break in radio.
What a glorious start that is. Yes. But there was no studio working properly, or did it work just about?
It worked just about. You're quite right. The whole thing was had no money in the organisation. The whole thing was run on a shoestring. There was a lot of broken things. We had a cart machine that fired sometimes, didn't fire sometimes. But if it's your first job in radio, you are so grateful to have got your foot in the door. And I'm sure everybody else who's in radio here will agree, your first job, you do anything just to keep that job. And I managed to, by the skin of my teeth, managed to hold on to that job for about 9 months. It was very difficult. There was no money. There was a lot of very explosive characters on the ship. Very big, I think Kenny Everett said, disc jockeys are not human, and they shouldn't be put together for long periods of time. Well, it was very explosive, and
it's certainly not on a ship.
No, absolutely.
Was Bob Noakes accurate in his description of how it was on a pop ship?
Yes. As far as I know, there may be some factual mistakes that I'm not aware of, but if you read that book, the whole atmosphere of that book and a lot of the stories are they may not all be true, but I gave it to my son, actually. I bought a copy on eBay, and I gave it to my son, and I said, read that. That's what it was like. That's what it was like.
Yeah. But you're also on the station with radio jingles. Sonar Fox stuff you'd be made.
Oh, I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, when Caroline first came on, I discovered I was a jingle collector, as is John Wolfert, who runs Jam Productions in Dallas and now owns the PAM stuff. And I had learned how to do Sonovox, and most of you will know what this is now. But it's like two little speakers you put up to your throat, and you mouth the words without using your vocal cords, and whatever you play through those speakers is caught by another microphone there, and that is Sonovox. And I'd learnt to do it. And so when Caroline first came on, the first time I went out to the ship, which was just a visit with the photographer, I took out this set of jingles that I'd done. I mean, stolen jingles from PAMs that I'd just Sonovoxed. And before I knew it, they were actually on the air. So that's how.
But you could have said, "Hey, I'm the man of this great radio jingles you're using." Didn't help.
Well, always loved jingles.
Mm-hmm. But they tried to make two stations on one ship, getting two transmitters ready, two frequencies. It seems to flourish in just a few weeks. Things look probably very, very good for the future.
I think when the Atlantis money came in, and when the Veronica money came in, and the Mimigo money came in, that made a huge difference. And they did put on the second station. I tell you, it was really. I hate listening to anything I've done ever, but particularly the times from Caroline, because I know, like everybody else, you're just learning your job at the beginning and you're not very good. But it was very difficult to cling on to the job there. Quite often you go back home and they would say, Ronan says you don't need to come back, have a longer rest. And you'd know that, you've been stabbed in the back and it out. And then what you do is leave it a week or so and then just turn up at the offices. And they would say, after you've hung around there for long enough, they'd just say, go out to the ship, and you'd have your job back again. So that happened several times. And my wife also, of that time, turned up, and she was sent out to the ship. Yeah. And she again, we were on and off for quite some time.
Yeah. It must be terrible to be on a rusty hog in midwinter.
If it's your dream, if it's something you've grown up with, and I'm sure all of you would not be in this room if you didn't really, really like that stuff. And some of us were very lucky enough to get into it. You don't see that at all. What was more difficult on Caroline was dealing with the atmosphere. There was a well, I don't need to say any more other than, a lot of the things that you read in the Bob Noakes book is true. It was a very, particularly when you're just young and you're very, it's your first job and you're trying to keep your nose clean and so on. It wasn't all that pleasant, but at least, you were on Radio Caroline. You could then say, I was a Radio Caroline DJ, which...
But did you believe the Ronan O'Reilly thing of restarting Caroline is like recreating the Beatles, and stories like that?
Well, Ronan had, as you know, this strange thing that he got, philosophy of some sort, and they were playing heavy music all the time. And there was an interesting one. We were playing heavy music all the time, which I didn't particularly care for. I was from the Radio England school, Radio London. I liked that kind of top 40 radio, and that's not what we were doing, but at least I was in radio. And anyway, one day the tender came alongside, and I'm on the air, and Andy Archer comes running into the studio, and he says, "We're changing format." And I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "We're going top 40. We've got another backer. We're going top 40. And I said, "Well, when's that happening?" He said, "Now. They want to hear it now, that it's changed to top 40. So the record came to an end, and he gave me the first record. The record came to an end and said, "Well, there you go. That was Deep Purple live in Japan, and we have a special announcement now. Radio Caroline is going top 40. That's right. Radio Caroline, the sound of the nation, is going top 40 with this one from the Osmonds and Wild Horses." And the hippies that were listening to the station were saying, "What the bloody hell?"
I think they only realized after a couple of days. Anyway. Yes, but then you thought, "Hey, I'm going to be the disc jockey on a top 40 format, Radio Caroline style."
Well, we did it for so long, and there wasn't very much money. That they didn't pay us very well, and as I say, it was a very fraught situation on the ship, and after 9 months, I could just kind of run out of all my savings and everything, and I went back home and I to my wife and I said, "That's it. I've done pirate radio. That was my dream. It's finished. I don't want to go back anymore. Let's concentrate on our discotheques and things like that." Then I was doing what happened? Yeah, I was doing a discotheque in a hotel for old people. The old people go to, if they're lonely, they go to hotels for Christmas. I was doing one in Folkestone, and Eddie Austin, my friend in Dover, phoned me up and said, "Hey, Radio Atlantis got their own ship now. Well, Crispin St. John's just said, Steve, if you're listening, give me a call. I'd like you to come out to the ship." And I said, "Well, we just can't afford to go. You can't afford. We've got all these debts, and there's no way that I'm not sure I'd love it." And anyway, I was doing a part-time job as well, delivering paper around London, and I'd had the most horrendous van delivering day. And I came back and I said, "I'm going to phone Chris St. John." So I phoned him, and he said, well, Andy Anderson's here at the moment, and we're going back out to the ship. So Andy will come and collect you if you want to come out to the ship. So I went out to the ship hoping, and I said to my wife Debbie at the time, I said, I'm going out there, and I'm going to see if we get paid, because he was saying, yeah, you get paid, and I said, well, I'm going to see if we get paid. So I'll just be 3 or 4 weeks, and then I'll come back, and if we get paid, then I'll stay. So 2-3 weeks into this stint on the ship, suddenly the tender comes on board, and I'm supposed to be going off on that tender to see if we get paid. And my wife is on the tender, and she'd come out to, God bless her at the time, she came out and wanted to be with me, and she'd gone and found who the people were in Holland, and she'd come out on the ship, and she got permission to stay on the ship. And I was quite cross, because I thought, I can't get off and find if we can get paid. What are you doing turning up here? Well, when you're that, you don't appreciate, those kind of things, and I should have appreciated it. But sure enough, we were on for another 2 weeks or so, and we came off and we got paid. And it's
an unbelievable moment.
It was great, yeah.
But there you were on another rusty ship in the middle of the North Sea, because it was a rusty hulk as well. I think.
It was actually. The Janine had a fire on board, and there was no engines in it. So technically, it was a hulk. Later on, I became captain of the ship because there was nobody else to do it. We didn't have a proper crew, and I became captain of the ship because anybody can be captain of a hulk. And the facilities weren't that great. We had the 1 kilowatt transmitter from the Rem Island. We had the remains of the 10 kilowatt from Radio 270, and we had a small frame for a small transmitter. And Andy managed to get the one transmitter transmitting about 4.5 kilowatts. We just had an aerial between the two. Talking about stealing, Ron was talking about stealing earlier. Bloody Caroline stole the Atlantis aerial. They had designed this aerial that kind of came up, you pulled the bits up from the middle, and they went round. They discovered that the Atlantis aerial was being built. They went round to the not the scrap yard, but the building yard, and stole it. They said, "Hi, we're Radio Atlantis. We're just taking our aerial now. We'll pay you later," or something, and took our aerial. So we had an aerial between the two existing. Andy was such a fabulous engineer.
But why didn't they take the plans and say, "Do us another one"?
Well, I think by that time, the ship was at sea, and Andy had managed to put a fairly decent aerial just between the two. There was a plan to buy a transmitter, and I believe Tony Houston and an engineer was sent out to America. They had a very nice holiday, but they didn't come back with a transmitter. I think they went to Continental Electronics and they said, no, forget it, and then they kind of gave up. So we then tried to get the 10 kilowatt working. We worked very hard on the 10 kilowatt, but Andy was trying to rebuild it, but he just couldn't get enough parts. So we then said, okay, let's build a shortwave transmitter in the small frame. And so he started to build a shortwave transmitter, which actually went on the air for a few days. And then something went wrong in the main transmitter, and he had to rob the parts. And so that's why the shortwave didn't last long.
Okay, but it was a bad business investment, I think, to put a lot of money into Radio Atlantis, with just, what was it, 10, maybe 11 months left?
Well, how can I put this? You all pay taxes, and there are some things that are deductible, and so what you do so you don't pay a lot of tax if you're a business is you find a big expense which brings down your profits. Well, if you're buying airtime on a pirate radio ship, that's an expense. Okay. So I think Adrian was able to use, I think the term was, I've got to be careful of what I say here, but I think the term was creative accounting in order to lessen his tax bill and advertise his own. I mean, basically, he was a frustrated pop singer, and the Belgian radio wouldn't play his records, so he started up his own station to play his own records. Records he had actually sung, some of them, and records that of artists that he had.
Yes, and he is a star altogether now. He has got his own orchestra. with tours through Belgium and France.
I can't say how generous he was. The ship maybe didn't have the best facilities, but we were never short of water. We were never short of diesel. He put heating on the boat. All the toilets worked. Anything that we asked for, we got. Vonnie, who ran the ship side, and she ended up in the picture as organising the tender because they had a CB radio on board. And they were using the CB radio, trying to call and get anybody. And they actually got this woman, this Indonesian woman, who then sort of by osmosis became our contact on shore. And she then ended up organising the tender with her husband.
Okay. And you were all very young, I think, the average age of 21.
That's right.
The other station had, well, DJs around 30 or 40.
That's right. I mean, we looked at RNI, and once we did a little calculation and figured out that the people on RNI were in their 30s, we were all in our 20s. There was something like a 10. Well, some of them were older than that, like Don. And so we had we were really trying to recreate what we'd heard as kids. That's what we were trying to do. We were trying to be like Radio London, Radio England in particular. And we were also trying to kind of combine it with humour and Kenny Everett type things. And if you listen to them now, they're all very silly. There's a lot of stupidness and I'm sure my head would have been flat with Ron's newspaper if I'd had him as a boss. But and then we should have been more disciplined and so on. But it was great fun, and we all got on together. Caroline was very difficult, very clannish, very huge amount of friction on board the ship, and particularly if you were just a junior. I mean, all sorts of very strange things went on, which were not even in Bob's book. But Atlantis, everybody was a friend. We were friends. We were all friends. We all thought the same way. We all loved the 60s pirates. We were trying to recreate it. We were having great fun. And
yeah, that was the atmosphere coming through the radio. I think everybody felt it was really serious, nice bunch of people there, making radio and enjoying themselves.
Exactly, and although we didn't have a very powerful transmitter, the audience were very, very good. You need a communications receiver to get us, I kept on seeing the thing saying geen signaal. There's lots of times when he had geen signaal there on Atlantis. But, and we drifted. We had great adventures. We drifted once. And we didn't know we were drifting because I just got on deck and I said, hey, that boy, that red boy that was there at the front of the ship, it's now about a mile behind us, and this is only half an hour ago, and then we started to see the coast looks very close, doesn't it, but Adrian flew in a plane and found us and then sent out a tender. There was no shortage of money in terms of, looking after us. He was a great boss.
But that's irresponsible, I think, getting a bunch of people out on a ship with no experience whatsoever, no nautical experience. You risked your life, didn't you?
Well, I guess we did, but when you're 21, you can live forever, aren't you?
Yeah, no harsh feelings when looking back and knowing what you know now.
You couldn't do it at this age. I mean, I don't, there's one guy that came out to join us, and we were at Vonnie's, and Andy and I were talking about this. And another thing, it's got no life preserver, and it's got, and it needs such and such. And do you know the storm the other day? There was a leak in the sun. We're doing this, and this guy's face was turning white, and he was supposed to be going out as a disc jockey. He then said, I'm just going to get some cigarettes, and he walked out the door. We never saw him again.
But, seeing the studio, it was just a very simple setup with one card machine. But still, it sounded like, what you call it, super top 40.
Well, the cart machine was from Radio London, and I owned that. I'd bought it from somebody. And I was told it was the Radio London one. It looked like the Radio London one. It was the RCA. One. But what we did was we only had the one. We did actually have two cart machines, but the other one didn't work very well. So we only used the one. But what Andy had done was he had made the Revoxes so that when you went into PFL, when you went into to cue either the tapes up or the records up or the cartridge machine up, that PFL recorded onto the Revoxes that we had. So what you could do is while a record was playing, you'd stick a cart in, play it on PFL, record it on the Revox, cue it up, and then at the end of the thing you could play a cart, play the Revox, play a cart, and it sounded like you had thousands of cart machines.
Great. And it sounded very smooth as well.
Tried our best.
Yeah. But how you made some jingles for Radio Mi Amigo whilst working on Atlantis? Was that it?
No, that was when Radio Mi Amigo came on the air. I think Radio Mi Amigo Sylvain Tack had taken over the Atlantis contract, as it were, and I think Adrian was genuinely surprised that somebody'd outbid him. And because Sylvain was a friend. Anyway, I was told that Ronan had said he'd send his jingle expert over. So I suppose there was no. Norman Barrington knew quite a lot about jingles, but anyway, they sent for me. I was on shore. I was I'd been fired again, and I then went out to the waffle factory that he had. And he had a recording studio, an 8-track recording studio. Well, I knew nothing about the how you record jingles. I know now, but I didn't know anything at that time how you recorded jingles. But I knew inside out all the PAMS material, all the TM material, that kind of thing. And so I just helped with the guy who had actually written the jingles and just said, well, could we rephrase them and make them more like the PAMS jingles? And we did some Sonovox things and so forth. And following that, they offered me a job as a studio manager at Radio Mi Amigo. So that was on land. But again, the knives were out, and I was manipulated out of that job. I won't go into any more detail because it's a long time ago. But anyway, so that's the way I left Caroline. But the boss, was he called Eddie? Eddie de Book. Eddie, I think his name was. I was told to stay at home one day, and I stayed. I stayed at it was like a little flat that Chris Carey had, and the disc jockeys used. And I was told to stay there because the Dutch DJs were going to be told off, and it was better if I wasn't there. And I didn't go to work, and then they came back and they said, by the way, you're fired. So right, I wasn't. So I went back via the office. I left to go back to England, went via the office, and Eddie was there. And Eddie said to me, I know what you've been doing, and I know what you've been saying. And I've been doing anything? Innocent? And he said, I know all about that. And I said, well, honestly, Eddie, I said, if you get to know the people in this organisation, I said, you'll be lucky not to be stabbed in the back. And that's when I left Caroline. It sounds like it's a moan against Caroline, but I was ever so grateful for that first job. I really was, but it was not a holiday camp.
No. It sounds dreadful, to be honest.
Oh, there were good bits about it.
But Radio Atlantis and this magical summer of '74, a great, lovely summer with lots of sunshine. But does it still stick out? Is it important for you when looking back?
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things that if you've been through it, and all of these people from the '60s and all the pirate radio people, all the people with the gods we admired. Oh, and incidentally, Klaas Vark, just while I'm on this, I went to see Klaas Vark at Radio Veronica. I was, Martin Stevens took us along. I was just a kid being taken along. And Klaas Vark showed us round. He was a wonderful host. He was a big star on Veronica. What a nice guy. We were nobody. Oh, well, I was a nobody and still am. But he was such a gentleman, a real gentleman, a really nice guy.
Yes. And we're very honored to have him.
Yes, it's marvelous to see him today.
Yes. Did it help you to be on the pirate ships for your career, for your name in the business, broadcast industry? Well,
you know what happened, the Atlantis closed down. Well, just about that time, commercial radio was starting off in England. And so I went back home with the hope that I might get a job in commercial radio. And I got a phone call, I think it was originally from Radioday, saying there might be a job coming up. And then I got to know Steve Merrick, and Steve Merrick phoned me up and said, there is a job coming up on Piccadilly. And following Rogers telling me that there was a job coming up, I wrote in saying with a tape. So this time I was out of work, and I got a rejection letter. Following Steve Merrick calling me and saying the same thing, I got an interview. He said, "Oh, I've arranged an interview with Philip, with the program controller." So I went up there, and it was amazing because a week before I got my rejection letter. But I went up to Piccadilly, and they had a junior job there as what they call a broadcast assistant. And at the end of the interview, they said, "Well, I think we should take you, and I'll just take you and introduce you to Philip." Philip Birch. So I went into to Philip, and he was nice, and I got the job. It was a very junior job, but at that point I discovered there was a department within the station that made commercials. Mm-hmm. And so on my spare time I used to wander in that studio, and I realized very quickly they had no idea what they were doing. They didn't know how to edit tape. They had no idea how to produce sound, and I at least had some experience of that, and it was, these were people who really wanted to get into television, and that was their first job. So before you knew it, I actually ended up running the commercial production department at Piccadilly Radio.
Yes, and people in the Netherlands don't realize, but Manchester and Piccadilly, well, I think it was the second big station of the country, wasn't it?
That's right, and Roger was there, Steve Merrick was there, we had Ray Terrett was there. We had a huge amount of talent on the station, and Philip was one of those. I've heard things lately about Philip being ruthless and so forth. My experience of it was not like that. He was like a paternal headmaster, and I was amazed once when somebody at Radio Clyde told me that they'd been to dinner at their managing director's house, because you would never. I mean, he took us out for a meal now and again, and he was a real gentleman, and he actually said some things to me about businesses that I've remembered all my life. I mean, all things like he would say, "Well, Steve, it's very easy to solve a problem by throwing money at it, but there's a smarter way to do it," and things like that. He's a great guy and very fair.
Okay. Were there any parallels between Radio London and Piccadilly, the way it was driven, or business behind the scenes or whatever?
Well, I think like all commercial radio, when it starts off legally in a country, what happens is the top politicians tie its hands behind its back. Oh, it's going to have a jazz hour. It needs a classical program. It's got to have children's shows. All this kind of nonsense. And I think Philip recognised that really it should have been like Radio London. So he made it as close to radio, to the that kind of sound. It's astonishing, really, when I got to speak to Philip. I thought he knew everything. He knew everything there was to do about radio. But when you started, he knew how to run a business. He didn't know absolutely the tiniest nuts and bolts about. Well, why should he? The way turntables works, the way, how carts operate. He knew the basics, but he didn't, I thought he knew everything. But he was a great, great businessman.
Okay. People say he wasn't interested enough in setting up the stations. He had only kind of a basic interest, and he wasn't really in it with his heart and soul.
I don't think so, because I think he took to me because I knew the history, and whenever I got a little bit of time with him, I would say, I'd ask him things that obviously a lot of the people there didn't even know his history, believe it or not, and I'd ask him things that I think you're always flattered if somebody knows something about you. And I wasn't trying to flatter him, but I was just curious, and I would say, well, how did you get the ship the first time? And, what made you think of calling it Big L, and all those kind of things. And so he treated me very well.
He liked to tell this as well. He really loved to give you.
Oh, yeah, he loved to talk about it. He loved to talk about it. And he was very proud of what he'd achieved with Radio London.
And suddenly you were making jingles again.
Well, how that happened was I was running commercial production, but I really, really wanted to work in the jingle industry. And this is another Philip one. What he used to do is he used to choose one person from the company each year, and he would say, "I'm going to send you over to America so that you can experience American radio." And I was lucky enough to be chosen one year to go over there. And he said, "Well, I'm going to send you to New York for 2 weeks, and you can listen to radio, you can go to the the National Association of Broadcasters, and you can get your ideas." And I said, "Well, do you mind if I go down to Dallas?" And he said, no, that's fine. And I said, "Well, I'd really like to have a trip down to Dallas." And he said, "As long as you pay for that part yourself, no problem, but I'll pay for everything else." So I said to him, "Well, I'm going to go over to New York for 10 days, and I'm going for 3 days down to Dallas." And I went over to New York for 3 days and went 10 days to Dallas. And already by then I had some contacts down there, and these guys are unbelievable. You know, John Wolfert was just an absolute workaholic, and so was Ken Justice. So I was with John Wolfert at 3 a.m. in his studio, and he said, "I'll just call Ken and see if he's about." I said, "Well, it's 3 o'clock, Johnny. What, at 3 a.m.? He won't be." And he called him, and yeah, sure enough, Ken was there in the studio doing whatever. It was fascinating to be there at that time, and also that was at the time when they were recording the auditions for Radio 1, some audition cuts, and I was actually at the session when they recorded those.
That's whoopee, I'm in Big D. Yeah.
But I really, really wanted to work in Dallas. That's really what I wanted, and I Ken Justice, who worked at TM Productions, got me a job in Dallas, but he couldn't get the paperwork through. So eventually, second best thing was that sorry, I just saw Tom. The second best thing was that a musician had come in to me, and I played lots of musicians, the Jam and the Pam's jingles, and they'd gone, "Oh yeah, that's easy, oh yeah, we can do that." But this was the first guy who walked in who said, "Hey, that's really interesting. That's like the high-lows." And he'd not heard radio jingles like that before. And he was the first musician who really thought that the Dallas stuff was actually really good, which it is. It's absolutely fabulous musicianship, played by people who know how to write and score and know their music inside out. And so he was the first guy that I met, and we set up a little studio. I left Piccadilly Radio, set up a little studio. That was Alpha Sound. He was called Alan Fawkes, Alpha. And for quite a few years, we produced quite a lot of jingles for the UK industry.
Yes, I think you had a huge amount of customers in the 80s anyway.
In the 80s, and it became obvious. The Musicians' Union rules where you couldn't buy jingles from America. And there was also a 3% levy on the advertising revenue that had to go to employ musicians. So what stations would do was they would say, "Okay, that 3%, that would for employing musicians, I'll have the jingle package done with that." So the budgets were fantastic. You know, we were having budgets of, 15,000, 20,000. You know, we used to think, "Oh, so we only got 7,000 on this one." Nowadays, you'd be very grateful for a £7,000 jingle package. And we were doing that. Then suddenly the Musicians' Union hold on the stations fell apart, and the needle time restrictions started to go, and stations could buy jingles from America. And I was very lucky at that time that John Wolfert gave me a call and said, "Would you like to represent me?" David Arnold had gone over and said, could he represent Jam? And he they thought about it, and they said, "Well, I prefer Steve to do it, because Steve's from my background. He's a jingle guy, and he knows how to do Sonovox, and so he offered. It was a bit like offered the Rolls-Royce franchise, to be honest, at the time. And so then, for a period of time through the 90s, probably up to the end of Alpha Sound, we were selling tons and tons of Jam jingles, and I was taking people over to Dallas, recording them, and then coming back.
Yes, but Alpha Sound stopped. What happened?
Yes. The biggest problem was when we started Alpha Sound, is the musician and his wife we all had a quarter. The musician, his wife, me, and my first wife. We all had a quarter of the business. Well, my first wife went out of the picture, which left me rather devastated for a while because, she left me. And by the time I kind of recovered my, brain again, I discovered that the shares had been brought back into the company, and her shares had been brought back into the company, and I owned a third, not half, a third. And these partners were 20 years older than me, and their horizons were completely different. And it's a long and complicated story that I won't really go into because there's still people alive. But eventually I had to just fold it and start all over again. Mm. And that's what I did.
They stopped and you had to go on with your smaller share?
Well, I'm sure everybody, you can't go through life without it being a war zone of some sort. You've got to have those ups. Well, my wife now says you've got to have the ups. You've got to have the downs to appreciate the ups. And she's quite right. And we literally had to walk away from it, and everybody was blaming us, and it was a terrible disaster. The company was turning over nearly $1 million at the end, but it becomes like a creature that you constantly have to feed, because if your turnover is 10,000, you might need £2,000 working capital. If it's turning over nearly $1 million, you need that much more money, so that it's always wanting money. It's always wanting money. And in the production business, the problem is you set yourself up with staff and everything to cope with the most. You can't control what's coming in and the amount that's coming in and the pace at which it comes in and when it comes in. And you set yourself up so that you can handle all the business and not let anybody down. And then business drops for a few months, by 10, 15%, and you find yourself in a loss-making situation, which you can't sustain for very long. So that was a problem. And then eventually I realized that the only way for me to escape was to just walk away from it and start all over again. Mm. And that's what I've done. And I now work with my son in a recording studio called S2 Blue. There's a new generation of jingle makers come along, young guys, want to revolutionize the world, and they have done. We still make jingles. I still record packages for the BBC and quite a few stations around England and so on. And I make a lot of radio commercials. And my son goes out and sees the people now, so they don't want to see a fat bald old bloke of 50 walking in and saying, I can make you some really great stuff. They want a cool kid, whatever, to come in and sell them. So.
And you still do your voiceover bits every now and then?
I still do. I do quite a lot of voiceover for our company because it's cheap. I'm really cheap. But voiceovers, commercial jingles. Commercial jingles aren't the kind of nowadays. Radio ID jingles are very fashion-led. So if Radio 1 or a big station in any country uses a particular company, all the tiny stations flock to that station. It's always been the same. That's how John first got started. He hit WABC, got WABC, and everybody was flooding to his door. And it's happened with the younger ones as well. It's a new revolution. They do things a different way, and they do the majority of the business. But we still do a fair bit of business.
Well, you are a DJ. You chose to do production. Do you ever regret the choice?
Well, I always enjoyed the production more and the jingles more. We've had a little local RSL. Do you know
about? You were a good DJ. Very friendly sound on the air. A great following.
Well, at Piccadilly, I realised that one day I was reading a book while I was on air, and I thought, if I'm reading a book, somebody else should be doing this job, because I'm not putting myself 100% into it. But actually, this little RSL started in the little town where I am, and I persuaded my dad to co-present a program with me. So although it's only on for 6 weeks, it's actually applying for a full-time license now, and he loves it, and he chooses all the big man music that he likes. And we just, he's been in show business. He was at the London Palladium 10 times, Royal Command Performance. He was a speciality act. They spun ropes and rode on one-wheel bicycles. And so my dad, Dad chooses all the records, and we go in and we do these little things on a Sunday, and that's the most fun, you know? And get all the stories out of him from his lifetime and get them on tape. And he just lives for it. He loves it.
Do you ever see, well, Radio Atlantis crew DJs from then?
Yeah, Andy Anderson had an interesting one. You remember Linda? I don't know if you remember Linda on the ship. She only did one broadcast. She came downstairs and she said, "What did you think of it?" And I said, "Well, Linda, I think you probably need to." And she burst into tears. So, and she's, "I'm never doing it again, never doing it again." So she wasn't on the air very much. But she was married to Andy, and then they got divorced for 10 years, and they got remarried again. By which time Andy was very, very wealthy. So when they divorced again, she got plenty of money, and Andy went to live on Cyprus for a while. I think I'm not telling tales out of school, but he said I can design new things in my head and on paper. He said I'm going to bloody well do it in Cyprus until this divorce is finalised, and then I'll have all this new stuff. I'm not going to give it to them now. So he lived in Cyprus. He lived in Cyprus for a while. Dave Owen, he runs Radio Jackie in South London, which was a pirate, an inland pirate, and time. Yes, we're running out of time. Okay, so but I speak to him every day. He's a nice guy. And we actually speak virtually every day. He voices for me for nothing, and I, a free voiceover, voice for him for nothing.
That's great. Yes. You still remember some Dutch words?
I don't repeat them. I learnt all the swear words first. Goedenavond, dames en heren. Dit is Radio Atlantis op 227 meter op de middengolf.
Oh, it's
terrible.
Well, you passed your exam. Thank you very much.
Got time for any questions, or are we finished?
I think we are...
We're finished? Okay. Thank you very much.